So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. I am Logan with Amon, Gantner, and Capriano. We like putting on webinars like this for St. Louis because there's a lot of confusion when it comes to estate planning. So this is always a good first step, and I welcome everyone tonight. We are located over in Sunset Hills, Missouri. We focus solely on estate planning and elder law. We've been doing it since the early 90s, and it's kind of we like to focus on just one specific topic instead of being a dabbler. Charlie Amon is the senior partner of the firm. He focuses most of his time reviewing existing plans these days, the financial and tax planning, and making sure things are up to date with health, wealth, and financial changes with our estate plans. Jackie Capriano in the middle. She's the introvert of the three partners, and she likes meeting one on one and diving into the details of the plan. So, our first step, usually after this workshop or any workshop, is a meeting with Jackie. And so, if you do ever want to meet with our firm, she'll be the one that kind of meets with you for your personal consultation and figures out, what type of planning might make sense for you and your family. And then Paul Gantner will be presenting tonight. It's his unique ability. It's what he likes to do. Many people don't like presenting or being in front of large groups of people, but Paul enjoys it. He likes to be an educator. The next slide is a quote that I think blends well with our mission as a firm. We think there's a lot more choice available if you plan early. I know with estate planning, it's a scary topic that we like to put off until the last second. But especially with our clients, we like to make sure they have as many choices available to them as possible. And that starts with setting up a plan early on in your life, not just waiting to the last second. So congratulations. Today you're going to learn about death and taxes, nursing home expenses, families torn apart, and how your plan might not work. Paul will be here to answer the questions throughout, and I know we usually get a lot of good ones. But before I let him take over, I like to tell a quick story about how I first learned about estate planning. Looking back on it, it was actually in high school. A buddy of mine, Stephen, inherited $100,000 from his grandmother. His grandmother had a very simple situation. She had a checking account that she wanted Stephen to inherit. So she had him TOD or payable on death for that checking account. So unfortunately, she passed away. So all of a sudden, at the age of 18, my buddy Stephen inherited $100,000. And so she avoided probate. It's a simple situation where awesome, avoiding probate, it can be costly and timely, but unfortunately, she gave Stephen a lump sum of money at the age of 18. And Paul will talk about tonight, who knows what the right time to inherit money is, but I can tell you, 18, you go through it pretty quick. Stephen had a lot of parties at his place. He bought new golf clubs. He took us out golfing. He got a new car, and he blew through that 100,000 in less than 12 months. I don't think that's what Grandma would have wanted. She could have had Stephen go to college with that money, or she could have put some incentives around the money, or maybe said it had to be invested until Stephen reached a certain age. Unfortunately, she didn't do that type of planning. Although it was a simple situation, she got the money to Stephen, but he kind of blew through it. And I don't think that's a legacy that she wanted to leave. So that's why I like to think about the people in your life or the causes in your life, and that who you'd be leaving your estate to. With that, I'll pass it off to Paul. Get a pen and paper and keep an open mind, and make sure to write down some good ones, and he can get all your questions answered tonight. Paul?
And thank you to the St. Louis art community. I'm excited to be here and help discuss something that's always difficult to talk about. Wills, trusts, planning and paying for long-term care. Why do estate plans fail, and what can you do about it? And hopefully by the end of this, you'll have a good understanding of what estate planning is and what it's not. Now, I don't have to tell you that these are kind of perilous times in America and throughout the world. In a normal year, every day in America, an average of 7,452 people die. So let's not forget the very real dangers of the coronavirus and COVID in terms of how that might impact us in the short run and the long run, and how it might have already impacted somebody and love close to you. And maybe for the first time, the idea of being stuck on a ventilator has become something that you're concerned about, or making healthcare decisions for somebody who can't make them themselves. So I want to talk about all of those things and answer any questions that anyone might have. And the reality is, in most people's mind, people think of estate planning as, I just got to sign my will before I die. I got to sign this document at some point before I die. And in their mind, all wills are the same. or all trusts are the same. It's just some sort of commodity, because people will call our office and say, how much is it for a will? Or how much is it for a trust? And that question doesn't really make a whole lot of sense because they're all different. You know, the answer I can tell you is no will is the same, no trust is the same. If they were and it were a commodity, Google it, and there are companies out there where you can get your online will for $29.99, or your complete package, planning package for 3 easy payments of $79.99. And the reality is a lot of those plans don't provide any benefit, certainly not the benefit that you think you're getting from them. And they lead to countless lawsuits and problems in your estate. For instance, estimated 1 out of 4 bankruptcies are due to overwhelming medical expenses, and yet most plans don't address the fact that a current 65-year-old has a 70% chance of needing long-term care in their lifetime. That means as you approach retirement, it's actually a probability, not a possibility, that you're going to need some sort of long-term care. And 40% of those people will enter a nursing home, and 20% would be there for at least 5 years. So we always want to have that talk. Now, again, we're going to talk a little bit in this presentation about different stages of the planning process based on where you are in life and what the biggest concerns are to you at that time. But at some point, that's certainly something you want to address, because long-term care costs can get really expensive. Private pay rates now are over $100,000 a year. And that can take a big chunk out of anybody's estate as well. So we're going to spend some time on that. So I want to break it down kind of first. I'm going to tell a couple of personal stories about why planning is important at 3 different stages in life. And you might be in one of these stages, and maybe you're here because you're worried about a family member who hasn't done any planning that needs to, like your parents or your children. So look at these situations and see if any of them you can relate to. One is maybe it's a young new family, just got married, just started having kids. Maybe they, in their 40s or even 50s, and they're accumulating wealth, and there's some concerns you need to be worried about there. Or maybe you're approaching retirement, or you just recently retired and you realize you're in a totally different scenario than you were in your working life. And now the reality of someday this is all going to end is starting to set in. But you might have more money than you've ever had before, and you have more concerns because of that. And then we have those people that are in that emergency kind of, I'm already needing long-term care. I'm seeing the money go out the door, and I got to figure out how can I pay for it, or how can I kind of wrap things up right before I pass away. So this is kind of an easy way to use an example. This is my own beautiful family. My wife, Sally, and we have 3 kids, Audrey, who's 6, Olivia is 5, and Louie actually turned 3 today. But obviously we have certain concerns. My wife and I are concerned first and foremost, if something happens to both of us, who would be taking care of our children? Who would be their guardian? Who would be their legal guardian? And Logan told the story about 18 is not the age to inherit money. Well, certainly neither is 6, 5, or 2. So if we have a life insurance policy that'll pay out a large sum of money at our death, or we have IRAs, we know we can't just name our kids as beneficiaries. That doesn't work. We need to set up a plan for not only how do they get them, or who gets the money, but how do they get the money, and who's in charge, and do we just want to dump it all out on them when they hit some benchmark, or do we want to spread it out over time? A lot of people just say, I want to set up a common pot trust to help protect our kids until they get through college. And then after they're through college, then we'll divide it up into 3 separate shares. But I don't want them all to get it when they turn 25 even. I think maybe spreading it out at 25, they get a portion. At 30, they get a portion. At 35 makes sense. Or over the next 10 years or something where they have to learn a little bit of budgeting and things like that. Maybe your estate's large enough that you say, if I died, my kids could live off the income alone. Let's say you have $3 million and you don't want your kids to just live off of that. You create $1 million shares for each of them that'll produce income, maybe $50,000 a year for their entire lives. And you don't want them to ever access that $1 million because you want to pass that down to the next generation, grandkids. There's all sorts of neat planning that you can do with the money at this stage, but really you're primarily focused on preparing for the unexpected. What if we get bopped on the head? What if we're one of those unfortunate younger people that gets a bad case of COVID or gets in a car accident, gets, something that goes on like that? Main goal is make sure we have somebody to raise our children, and then have some long-term tax financial planning. And one big thing that I always talk to couples about is, especially couples, but any young people, is usually if you are in a marriage, there's one person that takes care of one part of the activities and somebody else that takes care of the other part of the activities. And there might not be a whole lot of sharing. Like, maybe your spouse has never filed a tax return in their life just because you've always taken care of that. And they wouldn't even know the first thing to do about that. Maybe they don't even know the logins to your financial accounts, or where your IRAs are versus where the other accounts are. Getting some sort of written plan for that, net worth statements, income and expense balance sheets, all with the goal of ensuring financial security for your kids and your loved ones. That's kind of usually going to be your main goal. And again, this is going to be the top 1% of young families that have done this, but it's the reason that you should plan, and that's why you could be in that group. Next story I want to tell you is about my own parents, my mom and dad. They're in the middle. I'm the second of 7 kids. The 7 of us are in the back, 6 boys and then 1 girl, my sister Laura. My brother Tim, who's second from the left, actually works with St. Louis Arc, as does Jess, his wife, in front of him. And then my wife is in the picture with Audrey, our firstborn, still in her belly, and my sister-in-law Sarah over there too. My brother's wife and kids in the middle, George is the oldest. His wife and kids weren't able to make it in from Chicago for this picture. But the reason I'm sharing this picture is it's the last one that I have of my dad. It was at a family wedding back in October of 2014. And my dad, at the age of 61, went to bed a couple weeks later on a Thursday and did not wake up Friday morning. And I woke up to a phone call from my mom, who was hysterically crying at 6:15 in the morning saying, "Paul, I think your dad's dead." I said, "What?" She said, "I think dad's dead. He's cold and he's not moving. What do I do?" I said, "Did you call 911?" And she goes, "No, should I?" I said, "Yeah, call 911. I'll be right over there." And, by the time I got there, the paramedics were already walking back to the ambulance with an empty stretcher. And I said, I guess there's nothing you could do. And they said, "No, I'm sorry." And I walked into my parents' house, and my mom's crying. My 2 youngest brothers still lived at home. And my dad was passed away on the bed in the back room. Now, what I realized in going through this is, my mom and dad, I finally had do a plan. And when I started doing this, they admitted to me, I said, we got to update and look at what you have. They said, "Well, Paul, I got to tell you, we don't have anything." I said, "You guys raised 7 kids. You didn't even do a will to say who would be our guardians?" And she said, "No, that's part of the reason why we didn't do it is because, we have 7 kids and we didn't want to split you up, and we don't know, who can we just dump 7 kids on to raise? So we just decided, okay, we're not going to do it." So there's always some reason why it's difficult to plan, but finally got some planning together. And in the course of that, I was able to find out for the first time, what life insurance my dad had through work, or what IRAs, because my parents just didn't talk much about that. Not that they were hiding anything from each other. My mom was raising 7 kids, and my dad was taking care of that part of it. So my mom, admitted to me in this that, I've never filed a tax return in 40 years. I don't know what bills are coming out of where. And, I know all this stuff made sense while we were signing it and witnessing and notarizing it. We got this giant binder full of estate planning documents, but I got to be honest with you, I don't know what any of this means. I just need you to take care of it. And in going through that, I realized that estate planning is a lot more than having perfect documents and perfect tax planning and all of that sort of thing. Estate planning is having something in place that somebody can just take care of it if you were gone, for those people and causes that you care about. And so, maybe you're in the stage like my parents were, where you're kind of changing from asset accumulation to asset preservation. What if one spouse dies and one spouse lives for a long time after that? What's the income going to look like? What's the, what pensions are available? Is there life insurance? Are we going to have the house paid off? again, as you approach retirement, sometimes your income becomes more clear and we can kind of have more of a directed strategy. We know exactly what there's going to be and can kind of plan for that. And also at this time, it's kind of a realization that maybe your parents have passed away. You just went through their long-term care and you kind of realize that this is all going to happen to us at some point. And so if you're in that point, it's certainly, this is our key group that we're usually doing planning for. But if you are in that group and you have a plan that's outdated or you haven't looked at it in a long time, hopefully you'll learn a lot today. The last story I'm going to tell is about my grandfather and grandmother. My grandpa's in the middle there, and he was a World War II vet. When I started doing this in 2009, I became accredited by the VA to handle veterans benefits. And I realized, hey, Grandpa, you and Grandma have been in this independent living, but you're getting home care, and you've been doing that for a few years. Have you ever looked into if there are any benefits from the VA? And he said, no, I wasn't injured in the war while I served active duty and all of that. I've never used the VA for hospitals or doctor's visits. I don't think I'm entitled to anything. I said, well, there is this benefit called non-service connected pension or aid and attendance that you would be perfect for. It's for active duty service members that served at least 90 days active and at least one day during a period of war and were discharged under conditions other than dishonorable. And now you need help with activities of daily living. And it has nothing to do with the fact that you served. You're just getting older. You can see he's in a wheelchair. He was in his 90s at the time and, just need a little bit of help. So, well, sounds good. If I can qualify for anything, what would it be? And I said, well, the benefit for a married veteran at that time paid just under $2,000. Now it's about $2,200 a month to help pay for those care expenses. And I said, there are asset and income qualifications. So I'd have to do some looking at your estate planning and financials to figure out if you qualify. And if not, is there anything we can do to get you to qualify? They said, well, sure, let's do it, of course. And so we did. And we found out, they had a trust from 1993. And this was 2009. And they said, we had just done this a couple of years ago. And I said, guys, this was 16 years ago. A lot's changed in 16 years. The estate tax exemption in the 90s was about $600,000, which meant if you had more than $600,000, you were taxed 55% of every dollar over that, including the value of your house, your life insurance, your IRAs, your bank accounts, CDs, brokerage accounts. By 2009, it was up to $3.5 million. So that wasn't an issue for them anymore. And a lot of things had changed. So I had to update their plan for a lot of reasons, but I was also able to get the VA benefit for them. And my grandpa lived for about 5 years after that. And they were able to get $2,000 a month for 5 years. Plus my grandmother, when he passed away, could apply as the surviving spouse of a veteran for about $1,200 a month. And she got that for about a year before she passed away. Neither one of them ever had to go into a nursing home. They were able to remain independent and pay for the home care they needed, largely in part to the almost $150,000 of extra benefits they got from the VA that they didn't even know about. So maybe you're in that stage, or your parents are in that stage, or someone you know or care about is in that stage where you don't even know if your assets are going to last until you pass away. You don't know if there are government or private benefits available to help get the support you need. You might be worried about, hey, if I start to lack the capacity to make my own decisions, have I got somebody that can make those decisions? People are very surprised to find out that your spouse doesn't have the default ability to make healthcare decisions for you in Missouri. There is no default healthcare surrogate. So if you haven't delegated under a healthcare power of attorney, spouse or adult children or parents, if you're over 18, there's nobody who can make those decisions. And so maybe you've realized with your kids, if they've turned 18, that you need to have stuff in place for that. And that's when you're worried about those estate plan kind of finishing touches. What are the tax rules, or we have capital gains step ups and a lot of other things that we'll work on at that point. So estate planning is really about helping families secure their legacy. And this is our mission statement. We embrace each client as a member of our family through a long-term personal advisory relationship. So a lot of people do their estate planning and say, hey, if anything ever happens, I did my estate plan with this lawyer, and it's some person that they talked to one time 15 years ago for an hour and never saw again. And that's not the type of relationship that I think would be helpful to your family in this sort of situation. So what are your options? About 50% of people across the country over age 18 have no plan at all. So maybe you're in this group that has no plan at all. And that doesn't account for the people that have a plan that's very outdated. But having no plan is a plan. It's letting the state decide and their default rules what will happen to your estate when you pass away. Now, a lot of people say, I want to get my will together. I need to do a will. They think estate planning, got to do my will. But then the next thing they say is, I want to avoid probate. And they don't realize that a will doesn't avoid probate. In fact, a will directs probate. So what that means is a will doesn't mean anything anywhere in the world except probate court. So you can't just take your will to Bank of America or US Bank or Morgan Stanley or Edward Jones or whoever and say, here, my dad died and he had a will and I'm his only child and he wasn't married and he said I'm the executor and I'm the only beneficiary. So put all the accounts that were in his name into my name. They'd say, no, you need to go get letters testamentary to get an asset that was in his name switched over. And they will tell you that like you're going to pick up a gallon of milk at the grocery store, but getting letters testamentary or letters of administration means opening a probate estate. And we'll talk about why that might not be the best answer for you, but just know that your will is not going to govern what happens to your assets unless you're in probate. So you can avoid probate a lot of different ways, but you're guaranteeing that your will doesn't mean anything if you do. Or if your will does mean something, you're in probate court. So that's important to know. So a lot of people are doing living trusts, and living trusts are great. And they're one of the most common tools that we use, certainly, because it avoids probate. It keeps everything private. There are a lot of really good benefits to a living trust, but a trust is really just a tool to help carry out the terms of your plan. Again, it's a lot easier to determine not only who gets it, but how they get it and when they get it within your living trust. But what I would always focus on if I'm you is, what is my legacy that I want to leave? What things am I concerned about? What wealth is involved? What types of assets do we have? What's our income? What's our expenses? What's our liabilities? And let's have a plan. And then we'll have the appropriate tools built around that strategy. So just for visualization, as I said, a trust is not a trust is not a trust. Some people say, hey, I have a trust. Can I do X, Y, or Z? And I get to say my favorite lawyer answer, which is, I don't know. It depends. I'd have to read it. Unfortunately, that's always the answer. But what a trust is usually built for, it's like creating a tube of toothpaste. And we want to put the toothpaste in there, which are the assets that we want to protect. And we want to put somebody's hand on that tube of toothpaste. That's your trustee. And we want to choose who the toothbrushes are that we want to squeeze the toothpaste out onto. That's your beneficiary. And we can tell the trustee, squeeze it out for these reasons or for this purpose only. And everything that stays in the tube, we can protect, whether we're afraid of divorces, creditors, them spending it all, lawsuits. And as long as protecting government benefits that our beneficiaries receiving, as long as it stays in the tube, we can protect it. But once it's squeezed out, it's out. So that's just one of those things that I want everybody to kind of realize. So we do have these are the biggest mistakes that people make in their estate plans. And I don't know if anything's popped up. And if you want to, we can take a second to see if there are any questions or comments that we want to make right now.
Yes. Who monitors the actions of the trustee to make sure the wishes are followed?
That's a great question. In general, the answer is going to be the beneficiaries. So there is not going to be, with a trustee, there's no court supervision. I mean, that's kind of the whole goal, is we want to stay out of probate court. Otherwise, we could have a supervised probate estate and just do it the old-fashioned way. Usually, you only want to name a trust if you have a trustee that you can trust. Now, the trustees are fiduciaries, which means they're under legal duties to follow certain duties of loyalty, duties of care, duties to keep an accounting, duty to keep the beneficiaries informed, to be impartial. And if they breach those duties, it's called a breach of fiduciary duty, they would be civilly liable for that and they could be sued. So, corporate fiduciaries and things like that obviously have insurance and other things to protect them and It's their job to do what they're supposed to do. When you have people, I would say, don't name somebody you don't think would actually carry this out this way, because the only thing you'll have to protect you is the beneficiaries themselves making those claims, and they are entitled to do a copy of the plan when they become beneficiaries, and so they can enforce those rights. But that's generally it. And then the courts would enforce the terms of the trust when brought to their attention. All right, so let me go across some of the biggest mistakes that people make. Number one, they don't pass on their hard-earned wealth without government or court interference. They think, hey, I've got this plan together and I want to avoid probate, and they don't do it. And there are a lot of reasons for that we'll kind of talk about. One of it is a lack of proper funding of your estate plan, which means actually changing the title to all of your assets. So probate court exists for really good reasons. We have an asset that's in somebody's name. We got to figure out who gets it next. So if you die with your house in your name, we got to figure out who gets it next. If we didn't transfer title when you passed away, we'd have all these houses owned, in the names of people from hundreds of years ago. We would have no idea if the people had the rights to actually sell the house to the next person, or if they just inherited it for generations. So we also need to make sure creditors are paid and all sorts of good things. But before you even passed away, there's a chance you could be in probate court, and that's called living probate, which is a guardian in conservatorship, which, again, sometimes is a necessary thing. Many of us, if you have children who are developmentally disabled or incapacitated, have some sort of issues that they need to have a guardian past the age of 18, we would go to get a guardianship and conservatorship. And I've given talks on that, and it's beyond the scope of today. But if you are an adult and you have your capacity, then the presumption is you can choose who those people would be. And filling out powers of attorney and healthcare powers of attorney is something everyone over the age of 18 should do. And hopefully 99 times out of 100, we would not need to get a legal guardianship and conservatorship if in the future you lack capacity to make your own decisions because of again, maybe you're on a ventilator with COVID, maybe you're in a car accident, maybe you just have dementia. It can be very expensive if it's combative or if family members aren't getting along. It can certainly get humiliating as well, and it just takes a lot of time, and it should be really a last resort. But why do we want to avoid death probate? That's the one that we talked a little bit about. When somebody passes away and we have a house that's in their name, or our brokerage account that's in their name, or cars that are in their name, we got to figure out who gets it next. Well, in Missouri, it's a statutory fee. So it's 5% of the first X number of dollars, 4% of the next, 3%, 2% for each the attorney and the executor of the estate. So you have $1 million estate and you pass away, you'll have attorneys lining up because the statutory minimum fee, would be $30,000 or $40,000 for the attorney and $30,000 or $40,000 for the executor. And many times they'll petition for more than that when the time comes. So I had one of the next things that I'll say is it's open to the public. I had a family member say, hey, I wonder whatever happened to great aunt so-and-so's estate. And I said, I don't know, but if it was probated, you can find out. It's public. And I said, did they have a trust or did they do anything else? Oh, I don't know. I have no idea. I said, well, I'll check when I get back to the office. We can look it up. And I did. Said looked like she had about $700,000 in her estate. She had some brokerage accounts. She had this house. This is the person that was her executor. They hired this law firm. The law firm petitioned for more than the statutory minimum on the $700,000, so they got paid $55,000 out of that $700,000. The executor also petitioned for a little bit more. They got $42,000, so it was about $100,000 of the $700 went just to fees for those two people alone. Plus, we all got to see what challenges were made in the estate, who the beneficiaries were, how they got the money. And I said, well, what questions do you have? I just wondered, I guess if we were beneficiaries, they would have let us know. Yeah, I guess they would have let us know. But even if we aren't beneficiaries, we can go look it up. So, if you don't want your neighbors to find out or your friends about your estate, then you can you don't want to probate it. Time consuming, 9 months to 2 years typically. And if you have property in multiple states, then you're going to have probate in multiple states. So generally, again, probate, we want to avoid it. And sometimes people are like, oh, I just have this car. It's only worth a couple $1,000s. I don't need to worry about that, do you? Well, it could cost you hundreds, if not thousands of dollars to get out that little thing worth a couple $1,000s from the probate system. So yeah, I would spend a little bit of time making sure that you get that properly planned for. The number 2 biggest mistake is they don't have the plan for the long-term care. Again, if you're on the earlier stages of planning, maybe you're not so worried about it because the likelihood of somebody in their 20s and 30s it's not impossible. We have certainly situations where we have that, but it's maybe not the top priority for you. But the reality is we have far more clients that lose money to long-term care expenses that were unplanned for than any other expense. And there's only 5 ways you can pay for long-term care. When we go through this with our clients, we'd say, you can use your money. Let's look at what money you've saved up and what you have and what we're projected at. And, if we're worried about estate taxes for you, then maybe we're not worried about long-term care expenses because you can afford to pay them for your whole life and your spouse's whole life or your kid's whole life. And that's great. But other people don't have that much money. And so they might consider long-term care insurance. That'll provide you a lot of options on what type of care you receive. I'll break it down into maybe more affordable annual or semi-annual or monthly premiums, and it'll pay a benefit. And there's a lot of confusion out there. There's annuities with long-term care insurance. There's life insurance with long-term care insurance. It's important you work with somebody that understands those. If you have those policies in place, or if you're interested in those, there's a lot of different options, a lot of different positives and negatives about it. If you're 65 or older, or certain disability benefits, you would have Medicare or some sort of supplement or advantage plan, or this is kind of just whatever your health insurance is. And they're not built to pay for long-term care, custodial long-term care. They'll pay for hospitals, doctors, some hospice benefits if we're on that side of things, but generally not long-term care. So then we look at, that aid and attendance benefit that I talked about with my grandparents, or if you're a veteran or your family member's a veteran, and or Medicaid, and where does Medicaid fit in? And again, if we want to wait until we qualify for it, that's fine. If there are planning strategies we can do to protect some money, we certainly want to get ahead of that. The reality is most trusts don't work the way that people think they're going to. And the main reason why is they haven't done the funding. And I kind of alluded to this before. I've had countless clients come into us with plans that were drawn up somewhere else that they said, yeah, here we had this draft at this firm, at this other firm, and I don't think anything's in it. And I said, okay, well, what do you want me to do? And they said, well, first of all, it doesn't say the things we want it to say anymore. We want to make some changes, but then I guess we got to figure out how to get the stuff in the trust. So there are some things that you want to change the title over into the trust, like oftentimes your house, maybe a brokerage account that's after tax. There are other things you want to make beneficiary of the trust agreement, maybe your life insurance, maybe payable on death or transfer on death on your car, your checking account. There are other things we don't want to go into the trust until after the death of you and your spouse, maybe retirement accounts or things like that. And maybe never those go in the trust. I don't know. But having a plan for funding the estate plan is very important. The other thing to realize is a revocable living trust has a lot of really good benefits: avoiding probate, minimizing taxes, providing protection for beneficiaries. Some of these other things I'm going to talk about a little bit more in a second. Providing, preventing family fights and passing on family values. But if you want to protect for long-term care expenses, a revocable living trust will not offer any sort of asset protection for that. There's a 0% chance that your trust accidentally has protection for long-term care expenses. You will have to have actively tried to do that. So if that is a concern for you, long-term care expenses, make sure you have it reviewed by somebody who works in the elder law field, who understands government benefits and how those all fit in.
Paul,
Yes.
there's a question about that. What age do you recommend purchasing long-term care insurance?
Depends on the person. What I will say is, as someone who's insurance licensed, so I can talk about all this stuff, but also doesn't sell it personally. So I'm not in the weeds with it, but also have no, dog in the fight, if you will. Is I understand 50s is probably the most common. Certainly, if you're a healthy person in your 40s, you can qualify for more at a lesser rate, but you'll be paying for longer. And if you wait until you're in your 60s or 70s and you wait till after the stroke or after the type 2 diabetes or after something kicks in, your ability to be insured becomes a lot lower. Obviously, once you get to a certain age, I'd say probably late 70s and 80s for sure, but maybe even earlier than that, depending on your medical situation, you might not qualify. But that's the time to look at. And there's certainly people with less than this amount of money that shouldn't do long-term care insurance because you can't afford the premiums without going without something else that's more important. And we can use government benefits or other thing if you need it. And people with more than this amount of money that you can private pay if you ever need it. Obviously, insurance companies win in the long run or they wouldn't exist. So actuaries exist to make sure that you would be better off as a pool to invest the money and just pay for your long-term care expenses. But there are a lot of people in the middle that should really look at protecting their estate with some long-term care insurance. So moving on to the next one, this is kind of goes into that tube of toothpaste idea. And when I was talking about my own family and my own kids, that there are a lot of ways we can just get your stuff to the next generation if our only goal is to avoid probate. But if your goal is to have a thoughtful distribution strategy that might include concerns about, well, I'm worried that my kid's going to, get divorced. And, that son-in-law is really picked up on his drinking or whatever the case may be. And I don't want 50% of the money to walk away and go to new family when he gets remarried and he leaves it to that family instead of my grandkids or my daughter's side. You might want to be concerned about that. Or, hey, my kids are really great, but they are walking liability factors. Maybe they never had any money of their own, so they didn't pay their bills on time or, haven't filed taxes, or maybe they're very successful, but they just have a high liability job that you're concerned about, or a business owner or something. Is there any way we can leave it to them that would not be attachable in a bankruptcy or a lawsuit? And then this is the one that kind of, again, Logan alluded to in the story about his friend, that is a child ready to inherit hundreds of thousands or however many dollars, again, even $100,000. And the answer is, I don't know what age is the right age. Like Logan said, I don't think 18 is the right age. I would say the most common first age to get money is usually around 25. But there are plenty of 45-year-olds, plenty of 65-year-olds that should not get a lump sum of money all at once. And a dirty little secret about estate planning is inherited money feels different than money you've worked for your entire life. So no matter who you are, how much money you're leaving behind, how educated and well off your beneficiaries are, the average inheritance only lasts 18 months from the time that they get it until it's gone. So if you have a goal that's bigger than just give them a great year and a half, then you want to have a plan that's a little more thoughtful than just how do I avoid probate or here's who I want it to go to. And there are lots of ways to do that. If you're married or if you're in a blended family situation already, you may have a concern of, well, if I die, I want to make sure my spouse is protected, but I also want to make sure that they don't just take the money and give it to new family. Or what if they get remarried and that person lives longer than them, and then, my kids aren't going to wind up getting anything. So there are a lot of things that can be done, whether it's requiring a prenuptial agreement to be a beneficiary of the plan, or having a portion become irrevocable at the death of the first spouse. There are some things that can be done to make sure that if the money, if you die first and the money stays for your spouse, that it takes care of them, but that ultimately it'll go to who you want. This is a big one, obviously. I haven't found anybody that's asked me how to pay more in taxes and fees than they have to. So there are a lot of things that have changed. The Secure Act really drastically changed how inherited IRAs work. So if you have a big portion of your estate in retirement money, and you haven't looked at your plan since the beginning of 2020, you absolutely need to do that, because how inherited IRAs work is big time different. Most people are going to have to take it out in 10 years now after the death of the plan participant, where we used to be able to do a stretch IRA where you can take it out over their life expectancy. Now there are all sorts of exceptions and planning strategies that can be used, but you have to be aware of that. Also, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 really changed a lot of things about business owners, but it also changed a lot of things about most people take the standard deduction now. And most people always did, but now a drastically larger percentage takes the standard deduction, which means things like charitable gifts, you need to get more creative with how you do them if you want any tax benefits for charitable giving. There are a lot of other estate tax and death tax issues. Estate tax and death taxes haven't been a big thing for a while. In fact, since 2017, the estate tax exemption has been about 11.5. It's now $11.7 million per person. So, less than 0.1% of estates have anything to worry about at $11.7 million. Now, they are talking a lot about getting rid of that high exemption amount, maybe bringing it back down to 5 million, maybe even 3.5 has been discussed. They talk about taking away the adjustment and cost basis at death, all sorts of tax strategies that you have to stay up on that might be changing in the next year or two again. But that's why you always got to stay on top of it. So the last mistake that I want to talk about is no legacy protection. And I know, and I've learned through the years, that legacy doesn't really mean anything to the real world as we're walking around. But here's what I mean. How do you want to be remembered? And there are all sorts of great quotes about what a life well lived is. And when you truly pass away, when you're no longer remembered. But the reality is we have a lot of people that pass, in our world. We probably all know somebody who a family member or something passed away and they no longer go to family parties, or they can't talk to their siblings anymore because they had just this big blow up, or they didn't have anybody who could take care of it, and they made all sorts of tax mistakes and still haven't resolved things years later. Or again, most people don't have any kind of master record of just like logins and passwords or balance sheets or anything to leave their spouse or children or whoever it is that's dealing with this when they're gone. And that's about protecting your legacy. How are you going to be remembered? Again, or it should be a time to bring families closer together and not rip them apart. I know with Ancestry.com and 23andMe and all those, these family trees have become a lot more popular, a lot more digitized, but there are lots of neat things you can do writing down about family history that is lost forever if you don't pass it down for generations. Biggest client concerns that you're probably concerned about too, and what our job would be, or any estate planner's job is to kind of take care of. No government taxes and fees that aren't absolutely required. No family fights over money, and take this time instead to pass on wisdom and values and life lessons. And then number 3, and maybe most importantly, is protect your whys. Are you concerned about long-term care? Are you concerned if you passed away, is your spouse going to be taken care of? Are you concerned about who you're leaving the money to have some impact greater than just dumping money on somebody that you weren't able to spend on during your lifetime, and instead have a thoughtful distribution strategy? So knowledge isn't enough. Again, I think the real focus, hopefully, is to take this to your spouse or loved ones or whoever and say, hey, I think it's time I actually take this next step and do something. Remember, traditional planning really only focuses on signing a document before you die. And frankly, again, that's when you can Google cheapest will in town or whatever, if that's what you want to do. But if you want to actually leave a legacy behind, I think you should look at everything that's going to impact your family, have a thoughtful discussion, and build a relationship with a planning firm. Cheap estate plans usually fail because the documents aren't good. They haven't thought about the real life issues that we've talked about, like long-term care costs, actually funding the plan, going to each account and changing the titles. There's no timely updates. So when laws change or your life changes, nothing's updated. There's no protection if you should get changed, and there's no capturing of the family legacy and no tailoring of the plan to your specific beneficiaries. So what you should really focus on is how do we protect all the financial wealth while we're alive? Make sure we're making appropriate financial and tax strategies during our lifetime for as long as we live, then put together some sort of plan. Again, about 80% of our clients would use a family wealth trust, like a revocable trust structure. But then we would go the next step to figure out, okay, what's your whys and how do we help you realize them? Just to give you an idea, again, I have to disclaim this, of course, with I understand, and I know a lot of the other attorneys that work with ARC and all are great. I can only speak to our own process and our own prices and all of that sort of thing. So that's what I'm going to do here, just to help you understand what the next steps would be. So we almost always tell people, start with a webinar, take all the fear out of it, make sure you feel comfortable, because first and foremost, you should be working with somebody you're comfortable with. The next step, and maybe the most important step, is a personal consultation and plan design. And that's about a 60 to 90 minute meeting. That's where we discuss your personal family situation, create a planning roadmap, a plan to meet your goals, provide instructions on getting your asset details. The next step is if you, at the end of that meeting, we'll be able to say, here's what you should do. Here's what it'll cost. You say, sounds good, let's do it, or no thanks, then that's okay. And there'd be no cost after that if you don't go forward. If you do, then the next step would be gathering your asset information. So we just have a brief intake form for that first meeting where you just give us the basic information about assets and income and who your kids are you married, if all that situation. At the third meeting, you'll bring in statements and car titles and deeds and all that stuff, because we're going to actually go through and create a specific funding plan and fill out all the paperwork for you so that you don't have to mess with that, and that it's all going to be done when we're done with this planning. Next step 4 is with me usually. And that I'll go through and do a risk assessment and asset alignment. And that's when we'll talk about things like what insurance you have in place for various causes and reasons. Is it appropriate? Is it too much, too little? Would you qualify for any? Is that right? Or what are your investments, and how much is taxable? How much is not taxable? How does that fit in? Who are your beneficiaries? Have we thought about how they're going to inherit it? And just kind of run through all the details and coordinating that. And then the 5th plan is the signing ceremony, the fifth step. We do a video that I'll also explain every single thing that you've chosen along the way on your plan, so that when you walk out of that signing, we're going to explain everything to you over about a 90-minute period, witness it, notarize it in person, get all that done, scan it in, give you a flash drive with all the documents. But my mom told me one of the things I got from her was, it all makes sense while you're explaining it, but I got to be honest, the second I walked out of that room, I didn't know any of those pages in that document or that big binder. So I have a video that I put together and that I tailored to each client about what your plan is and what details of that plan, which I think is cool and a huge benefit for you and your family. And then we'll sign all the transfer forms to move your life insurance beneficiaries and your deed to your house and your car titles and all that at that as well. And then I think the biggest thing is having a lifetime communication and update relationship, which is very important, because things will change in the law, things will change in your situation, legal strategies will change. Number one reason why people don't plan, they procrastinate. I'll get to it tomorrow. I'll get to it next week. Don't let this happen to you. I'm sure I have family members that when I started doing this over 12 years ago, they came up to me at the family party and said, hey, I need to do my will. I need to do my will. Or I need to update my will. And 12 years later, there's still about 15% or so of those people that still haven't done it. I can't make you do anything. I don't want to make you do anything. I want you to take control of that. And the second reason is a lack of knowledge. And education has always been a big part of our firm. And I know a big part of St. Louis ARC. I love the fact they have spring and fall education programs that are just so in depth and detailed. And You guys are already in the top 1% by coming to things like this and just getting educated. But know that what you heard last year might not be the same as this year or in 5 years ago. Things are constantly changing. And like I said, you guys are already a proactive planner by getting this stuff done. Think about the defining moments in your life and how you want to be remembered. Again, I'm always somebody that gets the best value. I'm absolutely that. I always want an A, but if I'm going to get an A by getting a 92% and get some of my time back, then I'm going to do that. Or, I'll buy the nice car or the nice house or whatever, but I want to make sure I'm getting a deal on that. Are you someone that works with only the finest? Are you someone that gets the cheapest? A lot of people leave behind family disputes, court hassles, but you can leave behind planning that works. And so that's why you should take the time to do it. The most important part of planning is to make sure whatever is important to you is covered in your plan. And that can only be figured out through some sort of personal consultation and plan design meeting. So you do get what you pay for. Again, if you think a will is a will is a will is a will, $29.99 is the cheapest that I was able to find for a do-it-yourself document. But I would avoid bargains when it comes to important things like parachutes and brain surgery and fire extinguishers and estate planning. But I would always work with a firm that asks good questions and that listens to you. I would only work with an attorney that you feel comfortable with. I don't think you should do hourly fees whenever they can be avoided. I know they're very popular in our industry, but writes a blank check to not be very efficient with your time and theirs. We want to spend a lot of time going through all of our 5 meetings and all the work we have to do in the background to make sure everything happens. But we'd like to do that with a flat fee quote. And again, things will change over time, and that's okay. That's why we want to maintain a relationship with you if we work with you. And again, other firms, don't be working with that firm that you only see once every 15 years because it's just not going to be able to keep your plan up to date as much as you'd want to. And you want somebody that when you're in my mom's situation, and God forbid it ever happens where you wake up and your spouse is just not alive next to you, she had me to call in that case to say, what the heck do I do? And can you just take care of it? Whatever you do, don't let this happen to you, please. There's no greater wealth than peace of mind.
All right.
All right. We'll see you.
Thanks, everybody.